What's all this here? Oh, that was this morning. No, this morning I had to cancel some things.
So the rest of that, the computer's been fixed. The computer's been fixed, and it was just a few minutes. See, maybe some of that
I know, it wasn't working this morning either. I had to reboot the whole system when I came in at 7.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It wasn't working, so
I'm the director of the program.
when they got their
They've heard.
Have an advantage, I know who you are.
So it was a little, it's better now, but I don't know if it will last. We didn't want to do that.
Oh. I spent 3 years on Baffin Island. This is nothing.
Oh, really? Yeah. We have a group of...
Hello.
Morning.
Morning. Just empty my hands here.
I'm Christine Corey, the patient family representative.
Well, you know who I am?
Yes, Mr. Hurd, yes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Dungar. We spoke on the phone.
Who you know?
Me?
And we just met. I'll give you my card.
Were you dropping Michael off this morning too, or?
No, the traffic was crazy.
Oh, really?
Trying to,
Coming across this one.
well, I have to bus it because Julie takes Michael to therapy.
Right.
And I had to catch the bus at the Rito Center, and it was late.
Oh, my gosh.
And it was full when it showed up. So.
Oh, you're here now.
Well,
Yeah, that's good.
And the crowd yesterday was empty, and today everybody's back, so it's always worse the next day.
Oh, yeah.
But you're here, so that's okay.
No.
Okay. So you have had you have concerns, and so the purpose of the meeting really is to review with you some of those concerns and to review again so that we are all on the same page as clinical director, patient service rep, and patient family rep, and director of the program to have the same information at the same time so that we know where we're going all together.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be the natural next step when a parent has a concern. So I'm going to ask Dr. Benke to review again exactly where we're at with Michael.
Okay.
But to begin with, do you have anything that you want to say or mention before I ask
we'll wait till we...
Dr. Benke?
Yeah, we'll wait and see what...
So if I understand, though, your concern is that there's a decision made, Michael will be transitioning to school. He's been with us for a while.
Mm-hmm.
From what I hear, he's doing well in school. He's at which school? St. David? No.
St. Daniel.
St. Daniel's. And in kindergarten?
Yeah.
And he currently has an EEA with him?
They have 3 EAs in the school that kind of rotate through.
Okay.
So they take turns with the kids in the school.
Okay, and you said he's at therapy this morning?
Yeah.
Okay. So there, we have a baseline. So if you could go over some of the...
And I'll try to be brief because we went through all of this when we met very recently. So just to recap so that everyone has the information. I guess maybe it makes most sense to go back to September, at which point we did the 1-year assessment with Michael.
Mm-hmm.
He had been in the program on a full-time basis for 1 year, at which point we do a updated psychological assessment to look at how he's been doing in terms of his level of cognitive functioning, adaptive functioning, and a review of his diagnostic status. And we met for feedback about the assessment results shortly after. I know Julie wasn't able to come because she had just had the baby at the time, but the results of the assessment back then showed that there had been, although, a few things. First of all, we saw that Michael's level of cognitive and adaptive functioning were below the first percentile at the time of the assessment, and so I communicated a diagnosis of a global developmental disability based on those results. And then we also spoke a lot about the comparison of those results to those of the assessment that was conducted when Michael started in the program, so the baseline assessment. And what the results showed that there had been some gains in his adaptive functioning if we compared the two assessments, but with respect to cognitive functioning, we hadn't seen any significant change in Michael's developmental trajectory. So based on those results, given that there had been some gain in adaptive, no significant gain in cognitive, but that Michael had been acquiring, some goals on the ABLES. I had presented the assessment results to the psychology group when we had our meeting, and we had come to a joint decision that we would offer Michael an additional 6 months of full-time IBI, with the plan being that he would then transition out of IBI on March 25th, I believe it is, to go to school and other community-based programs at that time. When we met, and I know Julie had called me afterwards as well, Michael's mom, to kind of inquire about it, we had said, that was the discharge plan based on the results, and I know that, she as well as you expressed that you were, sad about that, and I said, well, if for any reason there were to be any kind of radical or very dramatic changes in how Michael was doing over the next 6 months, of course we would review, but this was the discharge plan for him given the results and the information that we had. So Michael continued with us full-time from September, 4 days a week, as is typical. And we met recently just to, confirm with you what the decision was, given that we were approaching the end of March. And Salwa and I did jointly a thorough clinical review of all of Michael's data in terms of his rate of learning and his progress within the program. And when we met recently, I mentioned to you that there had been no significant change in Michael's rate of learning in terms of how quickly he was acquiring targets or the number of programs he was acquiring in this period relative to the period prior to the assessment. So in light of that, we confirmed that the decision was to go ahead with the plan for Michael to transition out of the program at the end of March. And we spoke about how it was frustrating given that Michael is the kind of learner who has made gains on the ABLES, and he has acquired goals within the program across domains. So we've seen gains in that sense. So what we spoke a lot about was, the developmental trajectory and how, even though he continues to make steady gains, we haven't seen any significant change in that trajectory, and that therefore we would go ahead with the decision for him to leave in at the end of March, which was also why we had gotten Connections involved, and I believe you've had a few meetings with Joanne, the Connections worker, and she's also met with school and so forth, given that that was the plan that had been put
You
in.
have met with Joanne Schofield?
Yes.
Yes.
So that's sort of a recap. I don't know if there's anything else that you think would be helpful for me to review of that, sort of a broad summary, but those were the main things. And I know at the time when we met recently that, of course, you were both very disappointed that that was the decision, and you expressed some concerns. So I won't speak for you, but if you want to reiterate any of that.
Yeah, we asked for a final assessment, and we were told no, it wasn't going to happen. And I don't understand why we can't have a final assessment before he leaves the program.
Yeah, you had asked me for a discharge assessment, so I can reiterate my answer at the time, which was that we had completed the full assessment with Michael in September, and that based on those results we had put the discharge plan into place, and that the concept of, well, maybe we could revisit if something were to dramatically shift, but that this was the discharge plan, and so in essence that assessment had been completed, which formed a part of that process. And so, and given that it has been less than 6 months since that assessment, my opinion at that time was that it wasn't necessary to complete another full psychological assessment. So, which is typically our process.
Which is a typical practice.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was
Right.
my answer
Okay.
at the time. Yeah.
Yes, in typical practice is that assessments are done annually.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be quite a short interval of time.
Can I more fully understand the request? If that was the context.
I'd like to know, well, first of all, before Michael began the program. He was assessed over at CHEO, not by the autism group, but he was, at that time, he was defined as being globally delayed.
Who did the assessment at
I
CHEO?
can't recall her name.
But it was somebody at CHEO?
It was done in CHEO, yes.
Okay.
I can't remember. It was done in the,
Was it in
Well, was
the,
it part of OCTC by their?
maybe it was
Oh,
OCTC
gotcha, yeah.
that did the assessment. He was defined as being globally delayed at
He
that
was seen
time.
by Dr. Asha Nair,
That
who
sounds
was the
familiar.
developmental pediatrician. This was in June 2007.
Something like that,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, because they said he was mild to moderate.
yes,
Okay.
okay.
And then again, of course, we had an assessment when Michael began the
Right.
program, and I'd like to know exactly where he is at when he leaves the program.
Okay.
That's why I'm requesting the final assessment.
So your request is not a delay in the transition to school. Your request is specifically to have an understanding of where he is cognitively at this point in time.
So yes, through a complete assessment, yes. Know exactly, we know how he came into the program, we knew where he was at,
Right.
and leaving the program, I'd like to know where he's at.
Okay.
When I was surprised to find that it wasn't done, one of these things that was not typically done.
Well, there's a clinical context to it, however. So the full year assessment, Michael did get the full assessment in
Yeah.
terms of the adaptive and the cognitive and a review of the diagnostic presentation. So in that sense, you do have an assessment of Michael's functioning, but you're requesting that after 6 months that assessment be redone. Typically a child, and this is not just in autism, but typically a child who is seen for a full assessment, those assessments aren't typically redone within the same year. So if a child was seen for a learning disability and had the full assessment, that would be the same. It would be the typical practice. Because a child really doesn't change all that much in that 6-year period cognitively.
6 months or 12 months.
Well, 12 months, but here we're talking about a short period of 6 months.
So I was led to believe that there was a
So-
possibility of an increase,
And I think that's the discussion, is that the impression you got was that if there were to be a significant change, it would be worth redoing the assessment. However, there are different ways to assess a child. There are different mechanisms, or there are different tools you can use to look at that change, that rate of change or that change. And so my understanding from what you just described is that Salwa and yourself reviewed
We did a clinical review of all the
did
data.
a clinical review of all of the data that Michael presented in that 6-month period, and based on that clinical data, there was not enough change to justify another full assessment.
okay.
So I think that's where we need to that's where you really need to understand.
I'm a
the
bureaucrat.
Yeah.
I read this document over.
Which document?
This is the Autism Intervention Program Guideline Revision for
Yep.
February. Now, that's the
2007?
that's
Yep.
the ministry's copy.
I know it well.
Okay, good. There's one portion of this, a
Yep.
couple of items in here actually,
Mm-hmm.
in reviewing the document, under duration
Mm-hmm.
for the IBI program here. The last line that says a discharge assessment is required.
As
Now,
appropriate.
And the government does define what an assessment is. So that's what I'm asking for.
Okay.
Is that what you think you completed in September?
Yes, that's what was done in September, but discharge date
Yeah.
isn't until March 25th, and so,
Yeah. But the challenge
guidance.
is a government, and you'll have to understand that if we were talking about medicine, a physician, the government can't define what a clinical assessment means. There are different ways to define assessment, so I think that's where you have to be very careful.
well,
So diagnostic assessments, information referral will be used to,
Under duration.
yeah.
next page is the
Yeah.
duration.
So it's not like an assessment was not done. And I forgot my glasses, so this is not good. And duration. There's no clear-cut research-based decision-making process for determining their essential, which should be based on a number of factors. So the program provider evaluates progress of the child at regular intervals. So where did you see must?
Right there.
It's on page,
Right there.
page
It's
12.
page 12,
Oh,
right above 4.2, last line. A discharge assessment is required. So,
may be determined. A discharge assessment is required if it's deemed appropriate.
yes, but it also says, though, in the single line there, a discharge assessment is required. It
Well,
says additional assessments may be undertaken, and then the next line, a discharge assessment is required. And then again, the government goes on to define
well, and
what
you know,
an
this is where,
assessment is.
I mean,
Now, as far as as far as I'm aware, when the government writes up all this documentation, and I know there's a heck of a lot more than this, they dot their I's and cross their T's. Now, you signed a service level agreement with the ministry that you're required to perform the duties as outlined. You know, so, having said that, you have an obligation to do the assessment.
well, having said that, I have, I think, an obligation to think about what is
No,
the
you
next
do.
step.
Under the Canadian Code of Ethics of Psychologists, third
Yep.
edition, relationship to the province regulatory bodies, psychiatrists are expected to respect the requests of their provincial territorial regulatory bodies. Such requirement might define particular behaviors that constitute misconduct are reportable to the regulatory body and are subject to discipline. In other words, when you entered into this agreement, you're responsible to answer to the government.
So we're not psychiatrists, but that's okay.
Again, you've entered into a service
So-
level agreement with the government, and you're required to provide a certain level of.
Yes, and what I would answer to that, I think you need to understand that every child is cared for in this program very seriously and with great integrity. So I think nothing is taken lightly. I don't think we would ever make decisions willy-nilly.
I'm not getting a final
I think-
assessment, is what you're saying.
No, what I'm saying to you is I'd like some time to go review this and make a decision. But I think I need to convey to you that these decisions weren't made lightly. So, you know, if there was a significant reason to follow through with another assessment, there's not a psychologist, no, but just let me conclude. There's not a person who would say the contrary. But he was given a full assessment. And typically, and I think that's why I said, typically in practice, you would not redo an assessment.
Well, I have to.
I mean, you know,
Under the definition
You
of
could-
assessment, though, if you were to give me the full assessment, the final assessment, when they define assessment, you know, they talk about the clinical assessment. That's one area they discuss. The other area they discuss is
There are
the
different types of
psychological assessment and a developmental assessment. So the developmental assessment, periodically regional programs in consultation with the Ministry of Child and Youth Services may revise standard assessments used based on experience and best practices. All regional programs must use certain tools, and they give examples of the tools.
right?
I don't know which tools you are required to use. That's why I've asked the ministry for clarification. So again, I know some of these testing, is part of the assessment program process, and that's why, again, I know that full assessment hasn't been done before discharge because we haven't had our full assessment yet. A final
Well,
assessment.
I'm not.
Because I've also requested the service level agreements through Freedom of Information. And I'm not picking just on you. I've asked for all 9 regions. And the only other thing I don't understand is all this data that you collect is not turned over to the ministry?
Which data?
The data on each of these kids.
The clinical information?
All the testing. It's not turned over to the ministry?
Absolutely not. It's clinical information.
I find that surprising because how do you
Well, and
ensure the quality of the program if this is the reasoning why? Because when the government, we collect stats, we observe everything, we watch
Oh, we
everything.
do too.
And we report our findings upwards. So if you were to take 9 regions and get the test results of 9 regions of each of these kids, you don't need to know their names. I know how the record of freedom of information and records and personal data works. You can start to identify, based on the scoring of these children and how they're scored in the various regions, you can probably identify areas for improvement, best practices, lessons learned, be shared across the province through the ministry, as well as the clinical information is probably great for somebody doing research within the government. And they're not collecting any of this data? I find that kind of hard to believe because, every government writes up a policy statement and the purpose of the program, and anyways, the goal of the program is to provide high quality, evidence-based, potential, IBI, okay, and I don't understand how they can ensure the high quality if they're not looking at the data to verify that things are consistent across the province.
So there has been research done on some of the children in the program. There was a study that was published a couple of years ago that the clinical directors collaborated on with Dr. Adrian Perry from York University that was published with over 300 children. It was a retrospective file review looking at the outcomes of kids in the program. And then just in the past year we published from the same data sample the predictors, what predicted the children with the poorest outcomes and best outcomes in the program.
Because my problem is if the province is sitting down and telling you what the benchmarks will be, I can't understand how they evaluated or came to those conclusions as to what they would be if they haven't looked at the data that's being collected. That makes no sense to me. It makes absolutely no sense to me. How can they define what a benchmark will be if they can't determine what the norm is for these kids in the program?
Well, the goals of the program have been based on the research, and that's why the government funded the program in terms of seeing significant changes in children's developmental trajectory, which is what the original research showed, that for a small portion of the children who receive this kind of intervention, they do show a significant change in their learning rate or developmental trajectory. And for some children, the best outcome children, they lose their diagnosis and their overall skills are within the average to low average range after a year, 18 to 24 months of intervention. But that's not all of the children. There certainly are a portion of children who do not benefit from this service in the same way. And the more community-based research would indicate that it's about 10 to 25% of children who show very good outcomes. The original studies, which was more university-based and very controlled, I'm sure you're aware of that research. It showed that just under 50% of children benefited. So to my knowledge, the government has not asked for specific clinical data, or they're not analyzing it. The clinical directors and people in the program, and Dr. Adrian Perry at York University. Now that study was, I think, partially funded by the ministry to look at the outcomes, but to my knowledge, they're not looking specifically at outcomes.
So they've never even come in to assess the programs.
In what
Assess in
respect?
one way.
Yeah.
They've never actually come in and did an audit, let's say, of the program and how it's being administered.
Oh, yeah.
They do that.
Yes.
They do?
Yes.
They've done that.
Yeah.
Oh,
We've had
good.
people come in. Yeah.
Good, because
Yeah.
I requested
And-
the information.
Yeah, but honestly, it's not like we run. I'm going to say it. This is a very well-run program. We're very aware of outcomes. We're highly aware of outcomes. We are researchers. I mean, CHEO as an institute or as an organization prides itself on the fact that there's researchers. When they reviewed Michael's file, and I want to come back to Michael because I think that's the issue.
Oh, yeah, so I do
Right.
whatever it takes for my child, really.
Exactly, and I think we would do the same. And what we're saying is you have a team of people who have been working with your child who are very sound, very good clinicians, who took the time to review the file and made a very sound clinical decision. Now, I mean, your request, and it's based on something you've read, but what I'm saying as a clinical practice, we could say, okay, we will do a final assessment. Michael will be transitioned back to school as...
I know he's still going back to school, but I still want my
Yes,
final
he's-
assessment.
That's okay. I mean, if that's the bottom line and you want a final assessment, but what I would say to you is That's not typical practice. And so, but I'm just saying, from a professional point of view, it's not just in autism. When you see children in other areas, for example, learning disability, a child is given a full cognitive assessment. You don't typically reassess a child within the year. It's not typical practice. So the government may write things, but these are not psychologists who wrote that. They're not people in the field of research.
Oh, I realize they're not.
And I think that's the discrepancy. So I just need for you to understand the context that, these are sound clinicians.
Oh, I realize
highly
that.
professional, dedicated people
All
working
I'm
with
saying
Michael.
is you entered into agreement
But-
with the province
yes,
to
and we
provide
could-
a service,
and
and
you
one
know,
of those was
Mr. Hurd,
a
we can
final
argue
assessment.
about the paper, and if it's a final assessment that you would like, I can absolutely revisit that with them. I have no issue. I just needed this time to sit down with the team and understand a little bit where you were coming
Okay.
from and get the information from Dr. Benke, because I have not been available very much. I'm working on another project. So I needed to understand clinically from their perspective what had been done to date.
Mhm.
And I needed to understand what your concern was so that I can make an informed decision. And so I have Christine here with me. I would like to have some time, at least an hour, to think through what this entails. And then either call you back or have you call me back this afternoon. I don't want
Oh,
this
you
to
can
go
call the
on.
wife, you can give her a phone call too. And there's an answering machine at home there if we're not
And I
there.
can leave you a message
Yep.
on the answering machine?
Yep.
So why don't we do that? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, there's
Would
a
that
few-
be?
That's fine. And as far as Michael's program, though, itself, there's a few issues regarding that, too. Oh, when we first, and there's just, I'm not, when we first entered the program, we were asked, my wife is meticulous at everything. We got about half a dozen binders like this.
Mm-hmm.
When Michael first entered into the program, one of the things we were asked to do was to bring a reinforcer for Michael. That was a DVD player.
Mm-hmm.
It was a reasonable request. We thought about it. That Friday we get home, we find somebody else's DVD player in our bag. Based on that, I thought, I'm not bringing in a $250 portable DVD player
No.
to find go into somebody else's bag. The number of times that items have gone awry that we've had to send in notices for, saying, please find, please return. Our daycare provider got 6 kids to watch, never gets it wrong. You've got one-on-one. I don't know how you can continually get it wrong. Nail biting was identified right up in the beginning of the program as an issue. And family goals, one of them was to decrease inappropriate behaviors such as nail biting. That was identified in the very first assessment here, or the very first service plan agreement. Okay. So, the next one comes up.
So when
March
was this?
3rd. The first one was started the plan. Okay, the date on this was October 6, 2009. The date on March 30th. The fingers continue to be in the mouth. And then we get up to, that was March 30th. And then we get up to, what's the date on this one? September 28th. The shirt in the mouth. Well, I think the shirt went in the mouth because his hands were busy doing tasks as part of the program, so his shirt went back into his mouth. We took it into our own hands and we managed to stop the shirt in the mouth. The fingers continue to be in the mouth. The wife was there for an observation last week, and she said 3 times the fingers went to the mouth. Nobody's blocking it or stopping it. And the other thing was, we've had requests for reinforcement in the way of food sent in. Potato chips was the last request that came in. Well, we didn't have any chips. We didn't have time to get to the store. We turned around and said, here's some goldfish crackers to use as a reinforcer. That was shipped in. That was sent in 2 weeks ago. Last week it was the wife sent in the goldfish crackers instead. The goldfish crackers were never used. In fact, we asked, why are you not using the goldfish crackers? It was like, we don't know where they are. Other things like Michael has an eating disorder. We identified that long ago. You know, we turn around and we mentioned that there's Michael's daycare provider, one there has no problem getting Michael to eat. Talk to her, call her. We even talked to the daycare, said, sure, we'd be glad to talk to them. Nobody ever contacted her. Salwa said, we have our own plan, we have no need to talk to her. You know, that's great, but you know, I can't do everything myself whenever I take on a job. You know, it's good to have somebody behind you saying, what are you doing? How are you getting things done? You know, looking for advice and asking people how goals are accomplished. But to just turn around and block out anybody else who's offering to give advice or assistance, I couldn't understand that. You know, we brought it up more than once. You know, you're welcome to call the daycare and talk to the one at the daycare. She can tell you how she does it. You know, but she gets him to eat anything. She's gotten things into him we've never been able to get into him.
He's eating at home?
Probably just as well as he eats at the program. We've now hired a behavioral therapist who's coming in to work with Michael. And one of the things she's going to work on is eating. Excuse me, I got a bad back.
Have you brought some of some of this is from 2009. Have you brought up these issues to the
Well, we were always told, oh, we got to collect data, and that's when the shirt sucking was like, well, I don't know how long you need to collect data for, but you know, that's got to stop, and I put a stop to it myself. You know, the other thing is the inconsistency, and we talked about this, Michael coming down, and I've been watching again, and all the girls, with the exception of one girl, controls Michael's exit, leaving the program.
Just to clarify to you, so Michael's parents at the last meeting had raised some of these concerns, referring to them as inconsistencies, and one of the things that was raised was a concern about the fact that upon departure from the program, when the therapists bring Michael down, that some would let him run and some would make him walk, some would follow through on the saying bye and some wouldn't. And we had discussed how, you know, not all children have formal goals in place related to departure, you know, unless there's specific goals set because it's an issue or it's been identified as a priority, and thus there will be some natural variation in how the different ITs deal with it. That's not to say that, you know, we can't say, okay, well, that's, you know, if that's a concern for parents, we can implement this and this. But this was raised, the first time I heard of it was when we met.
Yeah, the other, like I say, it was something that I noticed was happening regularly was somebody was always controlling his exit. I would naturally assume that this was part of the program. And then all of a sudden last fall I noticed one would bring him down and she was bringing him down quite often, the same therapist. The other girls would bring down Michael, you know, it was like, you know, they'd stop him or block him from running. The one individual was not, you know, so for a year I was under the assumption, or the better part of the year, this was part of the program, and then all of a sudden it stopped. Sandwiches was another issue with Michael's eating. We sent in pastas. Michael ate pastas, you know, that was great. We decided because he was going into school, we would start on a sandwich in the fall. And we started with a grape jelly sandwich. And he had no problem with that. And it was discussed in the fall of last year that we would bring in, or we would change up the sandwiches so he got used to eating other types of sandwiches. We were sending him mock chicken sandwiches. They weren't getting eaten. In our last discussion, it seemed like it was, it was a bit of a surprise to them that this wasn't happening. You know, we've only got a few weeks left before Michael's out of the program, and we're still on mock chicken sandwiches. We've now gotten to the point, writing into the journal, that Michael has a mock chicken sandwich as a reminder. You know, please work on it. You know, another inconsistency. So these are little things. When you start to see little things happening, you begin to wonder how effective the overall program is. You know, I mean, I'm an analyst. That's what I'm paid to do. I watch, I observe, I read. I read everything somebody shows in my face. I got to read everything from senior management all the way through to a user's guides. You know, and critique all this stuff. And then I have to, What I do is I write software code to test software code based on the business requirement. Have you met the business requirement? And I have to start right at the very top with the policy statements and go all the way right down to the bottom of the barrel and all this documentation. It's a lot of fun. And then I have to write the code to go in and test the software that was designed to meet the requirement.
Which branch do you work for?
Human Resources Development. But they keep changing our name. Human Resources
Yes, they
and
do.
Service Development now. Because Obama didn't like the word social, and that's the way it was. Seriously, that's why we changed it. No, it wasn't, well, not so much Obama, but Harper. He didn't care too much for the word social in the program name, so.
So you do program it?
Yeah, I do programming. I worked as a business analyst, as a consultant as a business analyst. I used to be a cop. Yeah. But anyways, like I say, it's my job. I read a lot. I get my hands on everything I can get my hands on, and I read it. And I ensure that everything is done and done in compliance with the way the program has been set. Because one thing I've seen in a number of government projects is what Project Creep, where people start to get sidelined. And trying to bring that back in line is pretty hard. But anyways, like I say, when I started to see a number of inconsistencies, small inconsistencies, you begin to wonder what the overall inconsistencies may be. I don't know what goes on behind closed doors other than
Well, I would have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
And neither would we. And I think, just to
And I think that's
recap, Mr. Hurd, we reviewed most of these concerns with you when you raised them last
Yeah.
time. I'm happy to, give you the details after.
Yeah,
but
no, it's fine.
As I said to you at the time of the meeting, I sense that there's frustration behind raising these inconsistencies at this time. We were able to address most of them. The eating one, we followed up with the team at the end of the day to understand, because to give Michael credit, it's quite a success, the progress he's made as far as eating is concerned, because this is a child who wouldn't even put the food in his mouth when we started, and we implemented a lunchtime program, with the procedure of non-removal of the spoon, and he made tremendous progress in terms of being willing to eat his lunch and different kinds of foods. And so the program was actually formally mastered. And so the reason we looked surprised when you raised this was that the expectation of the team is that they continue implementing the procedure if any issues or behaviors around eating were to resurface. And sure enough, we checked with them, and they do. The thing that's challenging with the sandwich is he'll take a bite and then he'll hoard it in his cheek.
That's something he'd done.
And so we're not able to...
He'd done that even before he went into the program. He had always hoarded it in his
and
cheek.
so we would never, put a finger in his mouth. We would never force feed. So we get stuck in a bit of a situation where it can't, So I think that's what happens with
what
those
we would do is we would
sandwiches.
just push on his cheek, and force it into his mouth cavity.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, but give it a push.
Right. So he has made some
Yeah.
gains with eating.
Yeah, but as far as the sandwich goes, the only thing he'll eat is the grape sandwich. I mean, he'll eat grilled cheese sandwiches at home, but I don't imagine a grilled cheese sandwich to him is going to taste that good after 4 or 5 hours sitting in his lunch pail.
No, won't be that.
No.
No.
Would not be the kind thing to do.
No.
There is nothing to hide. I think we run I would have no issue. There's nothing to hide. I
Well, I'm
think
not
we
saying
do
there
run
is.
a tight ship. I think the quality of the work that's done, I can certainly vouch for it. I think your request will be considered. That's what your request. Your request is to have a final discharge assessment or a discharge assessment. We're still going to maintain. I just want you to understand that as far as I'm concerned, there was an assessment complete. There are different ways to assess, but I will review your request, and I'll get back to you today.
Okay.
And that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I understand your concern. And Michael, when is the next connections meeting?
I believe early March.
Early March.
Yeah.
And so the person who has been working with Michael in the connections is on leave, but another person will be stepping in, and I don't know if she's been
No, it's okay.
I don't know if she's been in contact
I'll have to check with the wife.
you.
I wasn't able to attend the last one at the school, but I am attending the one in early March.
Early March, okay. Very good. And if there are other issues that come up,
The only other thing...
I wish you'd come earlier, to be honest with you.
Well, you know, you guys should put out suggestion. What you should do is, other than meetings with parents, you should send home questionnaires and surveys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you want feedback from them.
We always want feedback. I think
Well, that's
feedback
the
is
best way
always
of doing it.
good.
Rather than waiting the 6 months or a year for a
Yeah.
review, you might be wise, like I said.
Point well taken. I think we're always looking for ways to improve. I mean, I'll certainly consider that.
What's the other thing? There was one other
And
thing.
if you have feedback, I mean, we're open to that.
Yeah, well, some parents
Constructive feedback is good.
some people are afraid to come forward because they're afraid it might jeopardize their child's,
Well, that's unfortunate.
you know, well, everybody, there's always a lot of people who are a little concerned about making comment for fear of, you know, reprisal. I see it a lot in my job.
I think that's a good point, and I think that's why, you know, I make a very conscious effort at the very first ISP meeting with parents to try to send that message that, you know, any concerns that you have, please bring them forward. It's not going to jeopardize your child's participation in the program. Progress is, you know, those decisions are based on his or her progress, you know, but we acknowledge that it is tough for parents. And
It is very tough.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to know is, why are some children moved on to the transition program that's off of, where is it, Industrial or Innis, and others are not?
So it's done on a case-by-case basis based on a number of things, their learning rate and their the profile from their psychological assessment. When we started that transition classroom in a year and a half ago now, we had a number of different children in the classroom. And what we found is that the children who benefit from the classroom are children who have, many of them have discrepancies on their cognitive profile. So some, either their verbal or nonverbal skills may fall within the average to low average range, but usually just part of it. The other part is significantly delayed. We did have a group of children who had an overall delay in their development in the classroom for the first 6 months, and what we found is that they really struggled being in a half-time program with us and a half-time program at school. That really they didn't learn very much, and because their behavior was being managed differently at school and differently with us, it was really challenging, and they didn't really learn. So we moved forward, and those children are now offered usually 6 months of full-time IBI and then transitioned into school rather than this half-time situation, which turned out not to be beneficial for them.
And then the transition goals for those children are embedded into their programming within their teams, which was the case with Michael as well, where when it was feasible, given the makeup of the classroom, he was in a 2-on-1 ratio. When there wasn't a good peer to match him with, he was back to a 1-on-1, but still with a focus on transition goals, knowing very well that he was going in that direction. So
yeah, the ratio in the transition class is quite different. It's 7 or 8 to 1.
Yeah.
So it's quite a big step, and what we found is a lot of the children, the early learners or early to intermediate, the lower end of the intermediate learners, were having difficulty with that step. So that was the decision, to keep them in full-time and move them as required clinically for those children into a 2-on-1 or and some of their time still in 1-to-1. Within the transition classroom, there is no opportunity for 1-to-1 programming at all.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was curious about that one.
Yeah.
And I think that's about all I
Anything else? If you, honestly, if you have constructive feedback that would be valuable for us to improve, we're always looking for ways to improve. We still do that. I mean, we do that all the time. And if you want to write something down, feel free.
Well, like
Or
I say,
call me up and we'll meet again. I mean, we've, like I said, we've got nothing to hide. It's an open door. If you want to come in again and give more feedback, that's great. If you want to put it in writing, that's great.
no, like I say, one of the best things you could do is probably put out questionnaires and surveys to the parents, because a lot of them don't have a means for feedback, or some of them they have a second job to get to. They don't have time to discuss issues. You got other family issues.
It's a great. I'm seriously going to consider it, to be honest. Now, we have done it before, and I have done it in other programs. And typically, initially, you get good feedback, and then it just parents stop responding, or they don't. The rate of return is so low that it doesn't represent your sample.
Well, it depends how long the children are in the program too. I mean, after a couple of months,
that's why I'm saying, we'll
they might
reconsider
drop
it.
off, but at least with new
We'll
ones coming
reconsider
in,
it.
you
Absolutely.
put it in your procedures that after 3 months, hand out a survey. You do have procedures, I hope.
We have procedures. Don't worry. We're not willy-nilly.
Oh, yeah. No, you got to see our place.
I'm
Anyway.
serious. No, I'm serious.
No, I'm saying, got to see our place.
Yeah.
I'm like, no comment on how the government operates. Anyway.
Right, but we are, you also have to understand, you work in a government of bureaucrats. This is about kids and families.
Oh, I realize that.
But there is a big difference. I mean, a clinical perspective is quite different, but still, we're very rigorous in terms of standards and protocols and procedures. That is rigorous. I have no issue with that, and I would have no problem discussing that. But we're still working with children and families, which is different than working with computers and.
Oh, you'd be surprised who I have to deal with on a daily basis.
I'm sure you have your hands full, especially in the human resources department.
One of my former bosses used to be one of the partners for Accenture, and he was quite surprised at how the government works. He used to come to me for coffee, and I'm a very low plug on the totem pole, and I'm talking about a man who makes 7 figures, who would come up and ask me for coffee. And upper management didn't really care too much for him.
Well, you clearly have things to offer, things to say.
Yeah.
So, your points are well taken. I appreciate your suggestion about the questionnaires and the survey. Seriously, I'm going to reconsider that. And I will call you. I mean, I have to go to CHEO for 10:15, but I will call you before the end of the day.
Okay.
That's what I can give you.
Sounds good.
Is that fair?
Sure.
And if there are other questions, you can call me. I will leave you with my card. Actually, I'll go get one.
Hopefully this works out with the bus schedule for you, Davis, so you don't have to wait out there in the cold.
It's a cold morning.
Well, in my line of work, I've got how many bosses? I've only got one real boss who actually knows or has a grasp of what I do on a day-to-day basis. The rest of them haven't got a clue until I walk into their office and say, it's hitting the fan.
Wow. Well, so we're lucky here then, I guess, because we know what we're doing.
All right. Well, thank you. That sounds great. Thank you.
Good to meet you.
Take care.
And I will send you a
We'll see you later. Bye now.
Okay. Thank you. Do I have them? I can just leave a voicemail at your home?
Yeah,
That's not a problem?
that's not a problem.
You don't want me to call you at work?
No, leave it at home. That way the wife will get it too.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.